At 23 minutes past midnight on May 7th, 2025, the Indian Air Force launched Operation Sindoor. Over the next 23 minutes, just 23 minutes, Indian missiles and aircraft struck 9 locations across Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Targets included the Jaish-e-Mohammed headquarters at Jamia Masjid Subhanallah in Bahawalpur, one of the largest gem compounds in Pakistan, and the Lashkar-e-Taiba infrastructure at Meridke near Lahore, the group's founding headquarters. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace later described it as perhaps the most significant and daring military strikes by India on Pakistani targets since the Bangladesh Liberation War of 1971. Pakistan retaliated. Over the next 96 hours, 2 nuclear-armed states exchanged drone strikes, missile fire, and Air Force sorties. At its peak on May 9th and 10th, the Indian Air Force struck key Pakistani Air Force bases, rendering them, according to Indian briefings, temporarily inoperable. Pakistan launched Operation Bunyan Marsoos in response. More than 125 fighter jets from both sides were at standoff ranges simultaneously, the largest aerial engagement with 4th-generation aircraft in recent military history. Then, on the afternoon of May 10th, a ceasefire was announced. Pakistan's Director General of Military Operations called his Indian counterpart. Both sides stood down. And within 96 hours of the ceasefire, the world had moved on. Iran, Ukraine, trade wars, AI regulation. The India-Pakistan conflict disappeared from the front pages. And in disappearing, it took with it a set of questions that nobody has seriously answered. Questions that I believe are more important than almost anything else happening in geopolitics right now. Because the ceasefire resolved nothing. The conditions that produce the conflict are unchanged. The structural factors that will produce the next conflict are, if anything, more dangerous than they were before May 7th. And there is a hidden variable, documented, confirmed by India's own Air Force chief, that almost nobody in Western media examined at all. I call this the 96-hour window problem. Let me show you exactly what it is. I am a researcher. Everything I am about to tell you is drawn from primary documents and named institutional sources. Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the Stimson Center, War on the Rocks, the Observer Research Foundation, the House of Commons Library Briefing on Kashmir, the Small Wars Journal, and official government briefings from India's Ministry of External Affairs and Ministry of Defense, where I present disputed claims. And there are several in this conflict. I will tell you they are disputed and why. The 96-hour window problem is this. When a nuclear-armed conflict between 2 states ends in a ceasefire in less than 96 hours, the world treats it as a close call that was successfully resolved. The news cycle moves on. Diplomatic attention disperses. The conflict is filed as concluded. But 96-hour ceasefires between nuclear-armed adversaries do not resolve conflicts. They pause them. And because the ceasefire happened so fast, faster than any serious post-conflict analysis could be completed, faster than any structural diplomatic process could be initiated, the pause is mistaken for resolution. The 96-hour window problem is specifically dangerous because it creates a false sense of resilience. Both sides fought, both sides stopped, therefore deterrence works and the system is stable. But the system is not stable. It is paused. And the next time the pause ends, which, given the structural factors I am going to show you, it will start from a higher escalatory threshold, with less diplomatic runway, and with the additional complication of a Chinese military presence in the conflict that was not there in previous crises. Let me build the evidence for each of those claims. April 22nd, May 10th, 2025. What actually happened April 22nd, 2025. Baisaran Valley, near Pahalgam, Indian-administered Kashmir. 5 gunmen emerge from the surrounding pine forests. The valley, known locally as Mini Switzerland, is packed with tourists enjoying spring weather. The gunmen are armed with M4 carbines and AK-47s. According to survivor accounts reported across multiple Indian media outlets, they check names. They inspect male tourists for circumcision. They single out Hindus. 26 people are killed, making it the deadliest attack on civilians in India since the 2008 Mumbai attacks. The Resistance Front, a proxy of Lashkar-e-Taiba, initially claims responsibility twice, then retracts the claim. The Indian response is swift and escalatory. Within 48 hours, India suspends the Indus Waters Treaty of 1960, a move Pakistan calls an act of war. India closes the Atari border. Pakistan suspends the Simla Agreement, expels Indian diplomats, closes its airspace to Indian carriers, cuts all trade. Prime Minister Modi, who was overseas on a pre-scheduled diplomatic visit, cuts his trip short and chairs an emergency cabinet committee on security meeting. The Indian Air Force begins repositioning. Up to 20 Rafale aircraft moved from Hasimara to forward bases at Gwalior, Ambala, Srinagar, and Nal. S-400 batteries repositioned to Adampur, Bhuj, and Bikaner. The IAF mobilizes approximately 400 aircraft. Transport sorties exceed 500 in the pre-conflict window. On the night of May 6th to 7th, at 23 minutes past midnight, Operation Sindoor begins. The strike package lasts exactly 23 minutes. 9 locations struck using SCALP EG cruise missiles, AASM Hammer precision glide bombs, and BrahMos supersonic cruise missiles. India's Ministry of External Affairs describes the strikes as focused, measured, and non-escalatory. The strikes are conducted entirely with standoff weapons. No Indian aircraft crossed into Pakistani airspace. Pakistan says 6 locations were hit, 31 civilians killed. India says terrorist infrastructure only. Then comes the escalation ladder that the House of Commons Library described as moving orders of magnitude more quickly than previous crises. May 7th, India releases high-resolution post-strike satellite imagery within hours, preventing Pakistan from suppressing the narrative of damage. This is critical. War on the Rocks analysts noted that unlike the 2019 Balakot crisis, when Pakistan could deny losses, this time India's immediate video evidence meant Pakistan had irresistible incentives to hit back. It could not allow India to strike its territory with impunity. May 7th. Pakistan's army launches mortar shells on Poonch, Jammu, worst shelling in over 50 years, May 8th. Pakistan launches its first drone wave. India claims 413 Pakistani drone intrusions were intercepted on the western border through the conflict's duration. May 9th and 10th. The conflict peaks. Indian strikes hit key Pakistani Air Force bases, reportedly destroying hangar infrastructure, radar systems, and, according to Indian official briefings, an early warning aircraft at Polari. Pakistan launches Operation Banyan Marsoos, targeting Indian military bases. India says all Pakistani missiles were intercepted before reaching targets. May 10th, 5 p.m. IST. Ceasefire. Pakistan's DGMO calls India's DGMO. Both sides stand down. Total duration, 96 hours of active military confrontation between the world's 6th and 7th largest nuclear-armed states. China's Yaogan satellites, Pakistan's kill chain, and what India's Air Force chief confirmed. Now, I want to show you the part of this story that Western media almost entirely missed. And I want to be precise about what is documented versus what is disputed, because the sourcing here matters. Pakistan's weapons during Operation Sindoor were overwhelmingly Chinese in origin. This is not disputed by any party. The JF-17 Thunder and J-10C fighter jets used by the Pakistan Air Force are Chinese designed. The PL-15E Beyond Visual Range Air-to-Air missile, with a claimed range exceeding 200 kilometers, is Chinese. The HQ-9 surface-to-air missile batteries that Pakistan claims intercepted Indian BrahMos missiles are Chinese. The FM-90 and LY-80 short and medium-range air defense systems are Chinese. The Observer Research Foundation's February 2026 defense strategy analysis documented this comprehensively. The Chinese origin capabilities, including JF-17 and J-10C, PL-15E Beyond Visual Range Air-to-Air missiles, the FM-90 SRSAM, LY-80 MRSAM, and HQ-9/PLRSAM air defense systems, and UAVs, were used by the Pakistan military against India. But Chinese weapons in Pakistani hands are not the hidden variable. That has been known for years. The hidden variable is what China did during the conflict with its orbital infrastructure. India's Air Force Chief, Air Chief Marshal Amarpreet Singh, confirmed in September 2025, 4 months after the conflict, what Indian defense researchers had previously reported. Pakistan's strategy had relied heavily on Chinese satellite intelligence from Beijing's Yaogan series, a constellation of over 290 dual-use military satellites capable of high-resolution imaging, to target India's S-400 air defense systems. The ORF analysis put it precisely. The element of the kill chain process on the 7th of May 2025, facilitated by integrating ground and space-based sensor data with frontline fighter jets, resulted in a serious operational challenge for India. The Chinese Beidou satellite navigation system also extended its aid through its real-time ISR capabilities, supporting precise detection and targeting against India. In other words, China's satellite constellation was feeding Pakistan real-time intelligence about Indian S-400 battery locations, enabling targeting that Pakistan's own ISR capabilities could not have generated independently. This is not India's allegation. It is what India's Air Force chief confirmed to have occurred. And then, in May 2026, a full year after the conflict, Chinese state television broadcast interviews with engineers from the Chengdu Aircraft Design and Research Institute, a key arm of AVAC responsible for advanced fighter development, who admitted providing direct technical assistance to Pakistan during Operation Sindoor. The Logical Indian, reporting on this, noted. The disclosure comes months after Indian military officials alleged that China actively supported Pakistan during Operation Sindoor through satellite monitoring, intelligence sharing, and strategic coordination. China's official diplomatic position during the conflict was that the strikes were regrettable and that it would safeguard Pakistan's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. China blocked international pressure on Pakistan at the UN Security Council level. And simultaneously, Chinese satellite and technical infrastructure was supporting Pakistan's kill chain against Indian assets. What does this mean strategically? India's Chief of Defense Staff General Anil Chauhan said it plainly in his August 2025 assessment. China is becoming increasingly more involved, though indirectly, through its aid to Pakistan. The ORF framed it as a doctrinal observation. The China-India-Pakistan triadic rivalry will only worsen with China and Pakistan tilting the balance as per their favorable terms. There is now a de facto China-Pakistan operational axis. Not a formal military alliance, but an integrated ISR and weapons supply relationship. That fundamentally changes the strategic geometry of every future India-Pakistan confrontation. The next crisis will not be a bilateral conflict. It will be a bilateral conflict with Chinese orbital and technical infrastructure on one side. India went into Operation Sindoor with fewer than 50 dedicated ISR satellites. China has 290 plus. India has already announced plans for a 52-satellite military constellation by 2029 and the National Technical Research Organization, India's signals intelligence body, has begun expanding its electronic countermeasures after demonstrating during Sindoor that it could jam Chinese satellite downlink signals to disrupt targeting. But that response is years away from full deployment. Kargil, then and now. Every analysis of the 2025 India-Pakistan conflict invokes the 1999 Kargil War as the closest historical parallel. It is the right comparison, but only partially. Let me show you both what the parallel gets right and what it dangerously obscures. What the parallel gets right, the structural logic. In May 1999, Pakistani military forces and Kashmiri militants occupied Indian positions in the Kargil district of Ladakh, while Indian troops were on their winter withdrawal rotation. India discovered the infiltration in early May. By July, Indian forces had recaptured most positions. The conflict lasted approximately 85 days and ended with a ceasefire and Pakistani withdrawal. Without resolving Kashmir, without addressing the use of Pakistani military support for militant operations, and without any change in the underlying territorial dispute. The House of Commons Library's 2025 briefing, written at the conclusion of Operation Sindoor, made the comparison explicitly. Analysts have pointed out that the underlying reasons for the conflict, India's view that Pakistan supports terrorist groups in the region, and Pakistan's view that India's actions in Indian-administered Kashmir are the cause of unrest, are not solved by the ceasefire. Nor is either side closer to agreeing over the sovereignty of Kashmir or its future status. That is exactly what analysts said about Kargil in 1999. The same sentence, 26 years later. The structural conditions have not changed, and that is the 96-hour window problem in historical form. Kargil ended without resolution, produced a temporary pause, and 26 years later produced a larger, faster, more dangerous confrontation. What the parallel dangerously obscures, the escalation speed and technological intensity. Kargil lasted 85 days. Operation Sindoor lasted 96 hours. The compression from months to days is not a sign of better crisis management. It is a sign of higher starting thresholds and faster escalation dynamics. The conflict escalated more quickly than previous ones, as the House of Commons Library noted, specifically because this is concerning, especially as India and Pakistan both possess nuclear weapons. War on the Rocks analysis identified the structural logic precisely. India has progressively tested the boundaries of what it can do without triggering nuclear use. From Uri 2016 Special Forces, limited to Balakot 2019 airstrikes, limited to Sindoor 2025 sustained multi-day strikes on Pakistani Air Force bases. Each iteration pushed the threshold higher. The most strategically significant evolution of India's actions, from Uri to Balakot to Sindoor, is the nature of the effects that India attempted to create at each iteration. In each case, it tested and pushed the boundaries of what it could do without triggering a war, and what it could achieve. The implication is alarming. Each crisis raises the floor of what both sides consider an acceptable response. The next crisis does not begin at Uri levels. It begins at post-Sindoor levels. Strikes on Air Force bases, strikes on radar systems, strikes 100 plus kilometers into Pakistani territory beyond Kashmir. That is the new starting point. And from that starting point, the escalation ladder to nuclear use is shorter. India's Chief of Defense Staff, Chauhan, acknowledged this in his July 2025 assessment. Operation Sindoor allowed significant space for conventional operations. He listed 3 conditions that kept it conventional. India's no first-use nuclear policy, Pakistan's status as the first to hit military targets, and India's stated focus on terrorist infrastructure rather than territory. If any of those 3 conditions changes in the next crisis, if India abandons no first use, if Pakistan does not escalate to military targets first, or if Indian strikes target territory rather than infrastructure, the escalation calculus changes entirely. A $36 billion decision that reveals India's defense dependency. Now, I want to show you the strategic consequence of Operation Sindoor that is playing out right now, in real time, in 2026, because it connects the tactical lessons of the conflict to India's long-term military posture in a way that nobody is connecting. France refused to give India the source code for the Rafale. Let me explain exactly what that means and why it matters. At stake is India's multi-role fighter aircraft program, MRFA, a proposed acquisition of 114 Rafale jets at an estimated cost of approximately $36 billion. It would be one of the largest combat aviation deals in modern history. France's Dassault Aviation had expected the contract to move towards signing in early 2026. French President Macron visited India in February 2026 with this as a priority. The deal has stalled over 3 specific systems that France refuses to share the source code for: the Thales RBE-2 AESA radar, the jet's air-to-air targeting system, the modular data processing unit, the aircraft's operational brain, and the SPECTRA electronic warfare suite, the system that manages the aircraft's sensor fusion, radar jamming, and countermeasure responses. Why does India need the source code? Because without it, India cannot independently integrate its own weapons onto the Rafale. Specifically, India cannot integrate the Astra Beyond Visual Range missile, India's indigenous air-to-air weapon, without French approval at every step. India cannot integrate the BrahMos air-launched cruise missile. Every upgrade to the SPECTRA threat library, the database of hostile radar signatures, requires France's involvement. India's position, reported across defense media and confirmed in Indian parliamentary inputs from March 2026, is non-negotiable. Source code access is a condition of the MRFA deal. And French authorities, who describe the AESA radar, MDPU, and SPECTRA as highly sensitive technology developed over many years, have consistently refused. Here is where Operation Sindoor connects to the MRFA negotiation. During the conflict, Pakistan's Chinese-made HQ-9 air defense system reportedly demonstrated capability against Indian BrahMos missiles. Chinese electronic warfare systems jammed Indian frequencies. China's satellite intelligence fed Pakistani targeting. And a Rafale jet, one of India's most advanced aircraft, may have been lost to Chinese-origin Pakistani air defenses. The Swiss newspaper Neue Zürcher Zeitung noted that the reported downing of an Indian Rafale jet by a Pakistani air defense system made in China raises concerns for Western military technologies. The SPECTRA electronic warfare suite on the Rafale is what should protect it from radar lock. But if India cannot update SPECTRA's threat library with Pakistani and Chinese radar signatures, because France controls that process, then India's most advanced fighter is partially blind to the exact threat environment it encountered in Operation Sindoor. Russia recognized this leverage point instantly. In June 2025, 1 month after the conflict ended, Russia's Federal Service for Military Technical Cooperation made an unprecedented offer: full source code access for the Su-57E export variant. The package includes unrestricted access to engines, optics, AESA radar software, AI frameworks, low signature technologies, and weapons integration pathways. By January 2026, negotiations had reached what Indian officials called a deep technical stage, with discussions focused on production at HAL facilities that currently manufacture Su-30MKIS. The most likely outcome, according to defense analysts in India, is a hybrid approach: continued pressure on France for partial source code concessions, simultaneous Su-57E negotiations as leverage, and sustained investment in India's indigenous advanced medium combat aircraft, the AMCA, whose first flight is not expected before 2028 to 2030. But the MRFA impasse reveals something deeper about India's strategic position. Operation Sindoor demonstrated India's doctrinal evolution, the ability to project precise, standoff conventional force across the line of control without triggering nuclear escalation. But it simultaneously exposed a critical dependency. India's most advanced Western platform cannot be fully integrated with India's own weapons without its French suppliers' ongoing permission. In a world where the enemy's radar signatures are shared between China and Pakistan and updated in real time, that dependency is not just a procurement problem. It is a combat survivability problem. Why South Asian instability is an economic and technology crisis, not just a military one. I want to step back from the military analysis now and show you why the 96-hour window problem matters to people who are not in Kashmir, not in Islamabad, and not in New Delhi. South Asia, specifically India, has become one of the most strategically important regions in the global technology and manufacturing economy. And a conflict between India and Pakistan does not just affect South Asia. It affects the global supply chains that every major economy now depends on. India's cloud computing and technology services market is one of the fastest growing in the world. India produces more engineering graduates annually than any other country. The major American technology companies, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, have built significant data center and development capacity in India. The US-India Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technology has deepened technology cooperation across semiconductors, AI, quantum computing, and space. India is also the primary alternative to China for global manufacturing diversification. Since the US-China trade war began in 2018 and accelerating through 2026, global companies have been relocating production from China to India. Textiles, electronics assembly, pharmaceutical API production, and increasingly semiconductor packaging. Every day of active military conflict between India and Pakistan disrupts this. During the 4 days of Operation Sindoor, global insurance premiums for freight through South Asia spiked. Indian airspace was partially restricted. Pakistan's airspace was closed to Indian carriers, disrupting cargo routes. The Indian rupee weakened on global currency markets. Equity markets in Mumbai fell sharply on May 7th and 8th before stabilizing on ceasefire news. Now consider what a longer conflict would mean. India's Bombay Stock Exchange is the 5th largest in the world by market capitalization. India hosts the operations of more than 1,600 global multinational corporations. A sustained India-Pakistan conflict, one that lasts not 96 hours but 96 days, would produce a supply chain shock comparable to or exceeding COVID-era disruptions in terms of its effect on global technology and pharmaceutical production. The 96-hour window problem is therefore not just a South Asian security issue. It is a global economic stability issue, and the global economy has behaved as if it is not. Capital flows back to India within days of the ceasefire. Multinationals continue their India investments. Insurance markets normalize. The 96-hour speed of the ceasefire was fast enough for global markets to treat the conflict as a non-event. But the underlying structural factors that produced it have not changed, and the next conflict will not necessarily end in 96 hours. The case that India has successfully changed the rules. I want to give you the strongest version of the counterargument to everything I have said, because it deserves a serious hearing. Prime Minister Modi, addressing the nation on May 12th, 2025, 2 days after the ceasefire, said, "Operation Sindoor is not just a name, but is a reflection of the feelings of millions of people in the country and an unbroken pledge of justice." He outlined 3 principles going forward. If there is a terrorist attack on India, a fitting reply will be given. India will not tolerate nuclear blackmail, and India will strike precisely at terrorist hitouts regardless of nuclear cover. Modi called this India's new normal, and Carnegie Endowment's military analysis of Operation Sindoor, published in October 2025, largely validates the strategic logic. India established, for the first time since 1971, complete military dominance over a confrontation with Pakistan. India struck PAF bases. India demonstrated that China-supplied air defense systems were insufficient to protect Pakistani military infrastructure against Indian standoff weapons. And India did all of this without triggering nuclear use. The counterargument, therefore, is this. Operation Sindoor successfully recalibrated deterrence. Pakistan now knows that terrorist attacks attributed to Pakistan-based groups will produce a military response that its air defenses cannot fully stop. This creates a disincentive for Pakistan's military establishment to continue supporting militant groups at the operational level, because the cost of discovery is now existential for their own military infrastructure. In this reading, the 96-hour window problem is actually a feature, not a bug. A fast, decisive, limited conflict. One that does not require protracted mobilization, does not occupy territory, and does not give either side time for nuclear escalation calculation. Is precisely what crisis management between nuclear-armed adversaries should look like. The speed was the stability. I take this argument seriously. India's Chief of Defense Staff explicitly said Operation Sindoor allowed significant space for conventional operations, suggesting that the military believes the escalation ladder has been successfully managed, not shortened. But here is why I think it falls short. The deterrence recalibration argument assumes Pakistan will change behavior based on the new cost calculation. Specifically, that Pakistan's military establishment will suppress militant groups rather than risk another round of Indian strikes on their air bases. The evidence so far, as of July 2026, does not support this assumption. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ihaq Dar told Pakistan's parliament that TRF is not illegal under Pakistani law. Pakistan successfully blocked TRF from being mentioned in a UN Security Council press release on the Pahalgam attack. No Pakistani official has been held accountable. No Pakistani militant group has been banned or significantly disrupted in response to Sindoor. If Pakistan does not change behavior, if the groups responsible for Pahalgam continue operating, then the next Pahalgam produces another Sindoor. But it starts from a higher threshold. And this time, China's orbital infrastructure has been mapped, its countermeasures partially tested, its involvement confirmed. Both sides now know more about each other's capabilities, which means both sides will prepare accordingly. That preparation is an arms race. And an arms race between nuclear-armed states with unresolved territorial grievances and a third-party military patron on one side is not stable. Prediction 1. Pakistan takes no measurable action against Pahalgam groups before April 2026. This prediction is already confirmed. The Pahalgam attack occurred April 22nd, 2025. The ceasefire was May 10th. It is now July 2026, 14 months later. Pakistan has not banned the resistance front. Pakistan has not extradited or prosecuted any individual identified in connection with the attack. Pakistan's foreign minister publicly stated TRF is not illegal under Pakistani law. Pakistan blocked the UNSC from even naming TRF. The prediction that follows, by April 2027, 2 years after Pahalgam, Pakistan will still not have taken measurable action against the groups responsible. This is falsifiable. Watch for any formal banning order, extradition request response, or prosecution. I predict none will occur. Prediction 2. The MRFA deal does not close in 2026. India uses Su-57 as leverage to extract partial concessions. France's Defense Procurement Council approved the MRFA in February 2026. French President Macron's February visit was expected to produce contract momentum. Dassault CEO Eric Trappier said in March he hoped signing would happen this year. It has not. I predict the MRFA deal does not reach contract signing in 2026 because the source code impasse is not resolved. India will use the Su-57E's full source code offer as active leverage in MRFA negotiations, pushing for, at minimum, access to the interface control document that would allow Indian weapons integration without full source code. France will offer partial concessions, perhaps Astra missile integration rights, but not the SPECTRA source code. The deal will be extended into 2027 with a revised framework. Watch for any joint India-France statement on enhanced technology partnership that carefully avoids the word source code. That is the diplomatic language of partial concession. Prediction 3. India announces a major quad or bilateral defense cooperation milestone with the US, Japan, or Australia in H2 2026. India's response to the China-Pakistan operational axis is not going to be public and aggressive. India will not accuse China of war crimes or make formal diplomatic complaints. India is simultaneously managing a complex trade and economic relationship with China. But India's strategic community has documented the Chinese involvement with precision, and India's defense posture is adapting. I predict, before December 31st, 2026, India announces at least one of the following: a formal intelligence sharing protocol with a Quad partner specifically referencing ISR capabilities in the Indian Ocean and Indo-Pacific region, an acceleration of the 52-satellite ISR constellation with a named international partner for ground station infrastructure, or a joint India-US exercise specifically testing counter-satellite electronic warfare. Watch for Indian Ministry of Defense announcements and Quad foreign ministers' joint statements in Q3 and Q4 2026. These are falsifiable. I will return to check them. I want to end with a question that sits underneath all of this. Operation Sindoor lasted 96 hours. The 1999 Kargil War lasted 85 days. The 1971 war, which created Bangladesh, lasted 13 days. Each conflict has been shorter than the last. Each ceasefire has come faster. The world has consistently interpreted speed as stability. But there is another way to interpret it. Each conflict has been shorter because the weapons are more precise, the kill chains are faster, and the escalation dynamics are more compressed. A conflict that reaches the same strategic intensity in 96 hours that previously took 85 days is not a safer conflict. It is a conflict in which the time available for diplomacy, for miscalculation correction, for back-channel negotiation, and for leaders on both sides to step back from the edge has been reduced by a factor of 21. The Kargil War had 85 days of back-channel diplomacy, American pressure, international mediation, and sequential de-escalation. Operation Sindoor had 96 hours. President Trump attempted to call Prime Minister Modi on the night of May 9th, the crisis peak, and could not reach him because Modi was in a military meeting. J.D. Vance had said days earlier that the conflict was none of our business. The world got lucky in May 2025, not because the conflict was managed well, though India's standoff weapon doctrine was executed with precision, but because both sides happened to arrive at a ceasefire calculation within the same 96-hour window. Had either side miscalculated, had Pakistan launched a more damaging counterstrike, had India's strikes hit a Pakistani nuclear facility rather than a GEM headquarters, the 96-hour window would have become something else entirely. The question I want to leave you with is this. In the next crisis, which structural analysis suggests is inevitable? Will both sides still arrive at the same ceasefire calculation within the same 96-hour window? Or will the higher starting threshold, the China-Pakistan ISR integration, the French source code impasse, and the compressed escalation dynamics produce a conflict that the 96-hour window cannot contain? I do not know the answer. I do not think anyone does. But I think the question is the most important one in South Asian geopolitics, and the world forgot to ask it. The next video in this series covers the fifth topic in this pipeline. America just told Europe to defend itself, and Europe cannot yet. The capability commitment gap. Why NATO's 5% GDP commitment is a political document, not a military plan. Click here to watch.